Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's midday weather outlook for the southern region brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. We're going to start off first here with a radar animation of Tropical Storm Isaias as it did finally make landfall here right on the North and South Carolina border late last night. And as the eye came on shore here, it moved very quickly across the state in the overnight hours. Along its way, it did drop quite a bit of very heavy precipitation and brought pretty widespread strong winds. We saw winds that topped out around 75 miles an hour, at least was what I was able to measure on radar. We're going to be getting reports later today of how strong those winds were. There were actually 9 separate tornadoes on the northern side of this, hitting this section of North Carolina and into Virginia. And that often happens on the northern and northeastern side of hurricane tracks, is that they tend to have great mid-level wind shear, and therefore any storms that do pop up can take on that synoptic scale circulation plus the wind shear and spin themselves. So we had some damage reports early in the morning. But this is not the last time that North Carolina is going to be dealing with rain as we press through the rest of this week. So before we go much further, let's take a look at how much rainfall did come out of this system so far. So through 6 a.m., we're looking here at a map that shows total accumulated precipitation, and we can see widespread 1 to 5 inches of rainfall. Some places maybe some locally heavier rain we're going to see later on today in total. Now outside of that, getting back over toward Georgia, widely scattered storms yesterday, and where the frontal boundary still is lingering, you can see getting into parts of the Mid-South here, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, some scattered storms as well. Meanwhile, because of the way that the atmosphere is kind of breaking in this large wave that's coming over the mountains, we can see the flow of the storms that did hit parts of Texas, Oklahoma, sneaking through this part of Kansas as well. New Mexico still seeing quite a bit of thunderstorm activity too. So it was hit or miss outside of Tropical Storm Isaias over the last 24 hours or so. Now, I want to talk to you briefly about the tropics here because this is, of course, a critical time of year for us in the South to be paying attention. National Hurricane Center is watching another area, but they've given it about a 30% chance of development here. And more than likely what this particular system will do will be stall out here under a relatively higher wind shear and drier environment to the south and east of Isaias. So we're not too concerned about this particular system at this point, but it kind of highlights what time of year we're currently sitting in for the tropics. Now, one of the more interesting things that we watched evolve over the weekend and early this week was the forecast for the Julian Oscillation. So you know that for much of the last 2 months, the MJO had spent a lot of time over here in Phase 1 and Phase 2. It then broke out at the end of July, and now in early August, it's sitting currently here. Well, it is forecast, look at this, to come right back across null and eventually end up back over into Phase 1, 2. And what that means is we tend to develop better rising motion here over parts of Africa and getting into the Indian Ocean. And that tends to suppress motion, upward motion in the atmosphere, where I just do that line from the South Pacific all the way to the West Pacific, where right now we've only seen one actual tropical system in the most recent 2 or 3 weeks that's moving through the Western Pacific, and it's called Hagaput, and it's right here, and it's expected to move the remnants of it out here toward the Aleutian Islands over the next 10 days. But what I want you to notice is, if you look in this area here, which I just enclosed the main development region in the Atlantic and the East Pacific, it's very clear that that area is going to have good upper level support for continued development as we work our way through the middle and end of August. And why we need to consider this is just to remind you where we currently stand in the hurricane season. We're about right here, okay? So we still have the majority of the hurricane season to go before we get to peak, and then the second half of this season as well. So to already be so far into the hurricane season and accumulate as much cyclone energy as we have in the Atlantic. So for example, looking at accumulated cyclone energy statistics, normally by this time we would have about 8.5 of these units. We're currently sitting at 22.5. But look at what's going on here in the Northwest Pacific. This would be where we get typhoons, way below average here, about a seventh of normal. So this is certainly a very inactive time period here for the West Pacific while it sits under this MJO that can't get out of the standing African wave. So that's going to be critical moving forward here because of this. You see, we've got this weak La Nina we've talked so much about. And remember that some of the consequences of a weak La Nina are to reduce the wind shear over the Atlantic, so right in through here. Now, this particular graph that I just showed up on the left-hand side here, tells you what that wind shear looks like. So really quickly, here's normal, okay? And the blue line shows us where we are currently through the month of August. And you can see that we've been bouncing around that normal line pretty closely. Now, years where we have like a big El Nino, okay, these wind shear values tend to bounce around up here. When there's a La Nina, they tend to be closer to average or even at times been time below average. Now, remember, wind shear is a change of wind speed and direction with height. And so we're talking here about having, for example, slow winds at the surface and really fast winds aloft. That'd be high wind shear. Those particular conditions tend to rip hurricanes apart, spread their heating, and destroy them. So low wind shear environments plus very warm ocean temperatures, which you can see I circled there, would indicate that excuse me, we have a pretty good setup here moving forward with a continued active hurricane season. Now, in the meantime, while we're waiting on these tropical systems to move through, we do have to be on the lookout for some strong to severe storms. Later on today, you can see in the Storm Prediction Center's outlook here for day 1, this would be over here on the left, we're going to be watching for storms to build down in this area, and I'm going to show you that in just a few moments. There's actually going to be widely scattered storms that are going to form on the backside of Isaias, not only today, but into tomorrow as well over in the Carolinas. We have a continued flood threat there. And as we work our way into day 3, the pop-up storms over here in parts of the southeast are going to continue to be kind of the main precipitation regime moving forward, because while the atmosphere is going to be relatively stagnant in that area, we're going to be able to build these storms in the heat of the day, and there's going to be plenty of moisture there to rise and create these storms. But you can see easily going back down here to the wind plots how the warm moist air is kind of pulling right back here into the south central plains, which is going to feed those storms there in the high plains, which could build down into the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma. So let's take a look at that first. I'm just going to play this forward. This is from our high-resolution NAM model. So we see that by noon today, Isaias is out. It's out of the southern region here. So what we're going to watch as we get into the afternoon, you can see the scattered storms already popping here in the late afternoon and evening hours. And so this is going to be the nature of our thunderstorm regime over the southeast for the next several days. But you'll see in the late evening hours, we're going to watch for storms to come out of Colorado, such that in the overnight hours, they could be pulling through the Texas and Oklahoma panhandle and through western Kansas and possibly get down into central Oklahoma and over toward Amarillo by early in the morning. So we're going to watch this carefully to see how these storms do behave in the high plains today. But they could send their outflow and therefore kick off new storms to the south of it as that occurs. Those remnants of the storms could push through Oklahoma, through much of the Red River of the South, that valley there, into early tomorrow morning. But then you'll notice by the time I get at 4 o'clock Central Time on Wednesday, we're already popping once again with storms from Mississippi all the way up to parts of North Carolina and Virginia. So that's going to continue to be an area over which we're going to see daily storms popping, not just through this week, but beyond as well. And as we work our way out here to Thursday, you can once again just see widely scattered storms as higher pressure tries to build in through the Great Lakes states. So putting that all together, what I've got for the next week, this is our total accumulated precipitation. So we see that with some of the storms coming through Texas and Oklahoma, we could be getting upwards of a half inch or more out of those. And then as you notice, getting over from Florida up the East Coast, we're expecting better than a half inch to an inch of rainfall in some locations here with these daily storms. What is important to notice is that the southwestern monsoon under this current flow pattern favors more of the New Mexico tract than it does Arizona, and that's been an area that's really missed out on a lot of these rains as of late. So let's get into some of the details here by looking at our operational run of the European model. We're going to pause it and step you back there, okay? So we can see very quickly that Isaias moves by this evening all the way here into New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, that area. And here's the high pressure cell that is currently sitting behind it. So once again, we do see the scattered storms behind this. But as we move forward into the overnight hours, there's the storms. The European model sees them as well coming out of Colorado toward this area. Not quite the same picture that the high-res NAM does, but you see a very similar setup there. There they are. So in the overnight hours coming into this area. So getting now into Wednesday morning and Wednesday afternoon and evening, we can once again see the scattered storms that are going to be hitting here over in the Carolinas, adding more rainfall to some fields that just got 4 to 6 inches of rain. Moving forward, this is now getting into Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon and evening. Once again, you just see the storms popping right here around the periphery of this high pressure cell. So multiple days of thunderstorm activity in this part of our southern region over here from Georgia up to North Carolina. As we work our way then into Friday morning, afternoon, and evening, we can see that nothing is really blocking the flow of moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico. So we don't have any big stagnant high pressure cells that are really just keeping the Gulf moisture away. So it's a lot of hit or miss storms as we don't really have any major frontal boundaries coming through. Over the weekend, storms try to race through parts of the Corn Belt. And you can see that those storms, as I work our way into Sunday morning and afternoon and evening, just once again continue to just pop right here, basically from Louisiana and the Delta all the way up to Carolinas again. So we're just going to see hit or miss storms in this area through much of the rest of this week. If there's a place where there's lower probability of that, it's going to be over in parts of Texas and Oklahoma, where after the storms today, we just get scattered storms at best inside of this area. Now that we've got you out to next Monday, though, I'm going to take a look at maybe the longer-term pattern to see how it's going to evolve, because I think there's some critical pieces here that we need to talk about. You see, we're seeing the reestablishment by day 10. This is out on the 14th. Of a deeper trough in both models, the European and the GFS, over the western United States. And they're both kind of hinting at ridging that's going to be taking place here over the Four Corner States, kind of in a direction like this. So that ridging tells me that there will be very few frontal boundaries sagging through the south central United States, but we could be getting more northwest flow at times coming over here to the eastern side of our southern region, which would indicate a better upper level support for more thunderstorm activity. So the GFS is a bit more broad with the trough, while the European brings a little bit sharper northwest flow on the eastern side. The European's broader with the ridge, and the GFS is broader with the ridge, and the European has better northwest flow coming around the eastern side of that ridge. So that's our setup. Excuse me if that was confusing. So let's just take a look at the end result. This would be the August 11th through the 18th time period. So much broader ridge here, indicating much drier conditions, both with the monsoon and over the south central United States. The European, notice it just doesn't have quite the level of dryness, which means a lot of scattered storms in that area, just no major widespread fronts. But what it does is it brings that northwest flow down, keeping the southeast coast wet. And you can see that the GFS is hinting at something like that, but it's a little bit different overall in its flow pattern with that broader ridge, keeping more of the corn belt on the wetter side of things. So a little bit of discrepancy here in the models going into week 2, but it's still something that I think they are in general in agreement about with the pattern. So what about those temperatures? Well, for much of the mid-south getting over toward Oklahoma, this is a cool day today compared to normal for our typical, early August temperatures. It's hot the closer you get to the Gulf Coast, a lot of mid-90s here, and then back in the south west getting over toward West Texas, very warm as well. But playing this forward, you'll see that here's our temperatures tomorrow and Wednesday. As we work our way through Thursday and then into Friday and Saturday, a lot of moderation is happening here with the temperatures returning back more toward normal summer-like weather in terms of temperatures across much of our southern region. Hot in central Texas, a lot of mid-90s down here across the south. That's pretty darn normal, maybe just a couple degrees above average. Working away into Sunday and Monday, this is where the ridge really becomes established west, and now you can see the heat spreading across much of the rest of the country here. But for us in the south, this is going to be pretty close to normal summer heat, so not too abnormal here. But as we talked about, when that ridge becomes fully entrenched in the western United States, you can see that the models are wanting to spread quite a bit of warm conditions here across a broad sector of the United States, and that includes most of our southern region. Why keeping things near average or cool down here along this part of the Texas coast? A lot of tropical thunderstorm activity happening here in the Bay of Campeche, getting up into the coast of Mexico, which is typical of this time of year. So this is the 6 to 10 day outlook. Let's take a look at that 11 to 15 day. And remember, with the establishment of that trough out here in the west with the ridge over the southwest, we can see the pattern really warming up for in both models for much of the United States, but with the southern region hanging on to its almost normal summer temperatures here. The heat's really going to be pushing from the Four Corner States up to the Hudson Bay, cutting across the central plains of the United States. So it's going to be hot, but it's closer to normal here for our southern region. Now, the last thing I want to show you is the new European weeklies that just came out. The good news about this is I don't see any indications in the model, in the flow pattern, in the precipitation or temperature pattern that cut down the Gulf of Mexico. Remember, this is the time of year that we start to worry about large ridges forming kind of somewhere between Atlanta and Nashville. And at this particular point, because that would indicate major drought stress here as we go to August and September, we're not seeing it just yet. The models are not cutting down that flow out of the Gulf of Mexico. And one of the big reasons why is instead of putting a big ridge over the southeast, east, it's keeping it way out there, even east of Bermuda. And so that's going to keep our Gulf moisture transport open. So it looks as though we're going to move into the end of the month of August under a warm, so warmer than average, but stormy pattern. So I don't see that slowing down. So don't be surprised if you see in your local forecasts, every day a 30 to 50% chance of storms across much of the southern region as we just move forward through the end of this month. It's very typical summer daily convection. And so we'll keep an eye on it, keep reporting back to you where that rain does fall. And remember, we're just now entering the most active time of year for hurricane season. So we'll keep an eye on the tropics as well. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again very soon. Thanks.